Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Charo Neville. I'm the curator of the Kamloops Art Gallery. And I'm joined by Cindy Mochizuki, who's been with us, as Margaret said, for the week, since Monday. Lots of work, lots of fun, lots of late nights. You'll see when you go into the exhibition why we're gathered in this way and doing this format tonight. The exhibition is very immersive. It's 4 major works of Cindy's, and she often will work on one project for years. So we brought together 4 of her major works from 1919. That would be terrible.
No.
2017?
No, 19. But 17.
Yeah,
sure.
Until 2022.
She aged me.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So I want to start maybe by just giving you an opportunity to talk about your practice generally, and not unlike how Victoria's project came together, your practice focuses on bringing untold stories to light often, working with archival material, memory work, and your work is informed by your own ancestry as a Japanese Canadian. Part of that is bringing stories to light from the Asian diasporic experience and weaving in your own stories. So I'll pass the mic for you to start.
Thanks, Charo.
Yeah.
I also just want to acknowledge a thank you to Dina and Victoria and Elsie also for landing the beginning of this ceremony and this exhibition, and Charo, and I also want to thank the Kamloops Art Gallery, Matthew, and all the install preps back there I see before we begin. But to locate my practice, I'm thinking about grandchildren and being a descendant of, I'm 4th generation Japanese Canadian, which is Yonsei. So my great grandparents came from Japan to Hawaii to Canada in the 1890s and had my grandmother, and my grandmother had my father. And so my work explores the aesthetic I would call memory work or post-memory work, where I'm a generation removed from the historical trauma itself. And I work through, as Charo mentioned, archival material, and also working deeply with the elders in my community and inside my family, and working through and navigating those stories. I have a media-based practice. I'm also informed by theater and performance and different ways to which we think about conjuring stories and telling those stories, and when is the right time to tell those stories. So oftentimes as an artist, I'll get invited to a gallery to respond to a site, and something comes up from that.
Can you also speak about the lack of images and how important that is to you as a media-based artist?
So, as I had mentioned earlier, my grandparents and my father were interned, and before they were interned, the Canadian government had made sure that no radio or cameras went into the camps. And so, a story that my grandparents shared with me was that they took turns burning the Kodak Brownie at the site of their berry farm, which was in Walnut Grove in Langley, BC. And so it's a history that's pictureless unless you will have government-sanctioned photographs that document the people going in and this campsites. And also because the homes were confiscated, albums were taken away, and so there's a mass destruction of images, and so there's no way to recollect even the life before the internment. I think my father said that in his camp someone had a pinhole camera, so maybe there's 2 images of the camp that they have. And so as a media artist that navigates through this idea of moving images and telling stories, I'm always fascinated with what does that picturing look like? How, as an artist, do you think about that and bring that back into present day? And what are the ethics behind my usage of these images and how they're used? So you will find inside this body of work that I've leaned into animation. as something that's not, it's something that comes from the body. It's a repetitive drawn gesture of a story, and it's a different way of kind of upholding that image.
So you mentioned that you work site specifically, and you're retelling stories from a place often. You're often invited by a curator at a gallery. What we're looking at right now is an image of the Autumn Strawberry Dance film. Was a project that you were invited by the Surrey Art Gallery in 2019 to work in their tech lab. So can you talk about the development of that project, the research, and then the installation? This is one of the major works that you'll see in the gallery.
So the Surrey Art Gallery, Jordan Strom, the curator, invited me to think about the region of Surrey, which was called Strawberry Hill, or actually Chicken Mura, Chicken Village, because alongside strawberries, the farmers had leghorn chickens as well, and Angora rabbits. And so for me, that's something that's like deeply personal, because my family had, these are two images of my grandparents' berry farm. I think this little baby is my dad, and should he be alive today, it was his birthday today, April 20th, and his sisters, and they would often employ berry workers from the city coming in to work. And so Jordan asked me to work with the community in Surrey, and anyone that might remember their time on these farms. But if you think about that Issei generation, so the first generation, would no longer be alive, and the Nisei, the second generation, would be about 80 to 90, maybe 100. And you know, there's some that are alive still, but if you think about that, they've now in this age where memory is slippery, right? And so I put a call out to see who might like to come forward and work with me, and I was shocked. You know, I set up a studio and people would come by and tell me stories. The family here are the Sakon sisters, and their grandfather, Bunjiro Sakon, coined the term autumn strawberry, which was a hothouse berry it was like a forced strawberry that came out of a hothouse, not unlike the hothouses we have now. So it's like a Douglas fir wooden kind of structure that's heated with coal at the bottom. And it's just a way of survival through the fall and winter months so that they had crops. So he also branded a forced rhubarb and different kinds of fruits. And so as I stayed through the course of these months, different elders came by. I worked with the museum, different stories kind of cropped up, and I basically shaped a script, what ended up becoming a 60-minute animation of these kind of miniature stories. And I think what's also important inside my work is that we have kind of official, capital H, historic information. I'm always curious about this stuff that is not documented, and oftentimes in our history, I think Japanese Canadian men are documented more, but women and children maybe not so much. So the perspective of these elders, they're remembering their time as kids on these farms. So there's a real micro level of stories inside the work. And so it's multimedia, many channels, and the viewer immerses himself inside and kind of walks through these spaces of abandoned barn and tree stumps. And that's a significant kind of acknowledgement also that as Japanese Canadian settlers, they were granted land that farmers thought were unfarmable because they were filled with tree stumps of Douglas fir. And so there's a clear cutting method called tree stumping, which is very dangerous, where you place dynamite around the stumps. You need to have a horse and chain and pull the tree stumps out. And these farmers didn't think that these Japanese pioneers could do this, but they were able to transform this, like what they thought was unusable land, that wasn't their land to begin with anyways, and thrive and be successful. So it's kind of this layered, complex relationship to the land and their farms and their memory inside Autumn Strawberry.
Do you want to mention the amazing connection that you made today?
Yeah. So when my grandfather, so my grandfather had this berry farm in Walnut Grove in Langley, and you need to have somebody call you over from Canada to start the farms. And so there's a letter called a Yobi Yose letter. So it's a beautiful calling letter. It's very lyrical. I found one in the Nikkei Museum archives and in a book. And basically it's like, you know, the fish are jumping, the salmon are jumping. You can catch abundance of fish. We're gonna make it rich. It'll be a dream of riches. Come over from your village and come to Canada. And so you needed somebody to invite you or to grant you the opportunity to come and work here. And we think in my family, this man was Mr. Nonamura. And when I go into the research of my family archives, I found this land deed, and in it, my grandfather, Tajiro Mochizuki, and Mr. Nonamura have like kind of a business of berry farms together. I found out, and this is sort of known to me, that he's buried here in Kamloops. And my aunt, who's 90, was like, if you go, you have to make sure, because no one from our family has laid flowers on his grave yet. So earlier today, or actually, Cindy Mochizuki #1, who's here from Kamloops, my named doppelganger, everyone thought this show was her show. And she's right there, Cindy Mochizuki, who's famous because everybody knows her. She helped me out. And through the Japanese Buddhist temple, we got the plot of where he's buried. And this morning, my partner and I took some flowers. We were greeted by very large deer, and we put some flowers down for him. So that's a kind of interesting connection that he brought our family here. And when my father's family was interned, after the internment, they also were a generation that were exiled to Japan called Kikanisei, and they didn't come back to the late 50s, and I would say he also then brought them back again for the second time.
So this image here shows the making of the dance film that's associated with Autumn Strawberry. So that's another aspect of your practice where you often activate it through performance. Do you want to take us through this?
Sure. So this work, so I should also back it up, but Autumn Strawberry was made before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit, and then it got delayed like many times. And there was this aspect, because I had worked so much with elders telling stories, that they would be inside the performance. But because of the pandemic, we couldn't do this. And a window opened up in June of 2021 to work with younger people, younger descendants. And so I contacted the people that brought the elders, so their caretakers or their daughters, and asked them, would you like to come back inside this installation and do a performance for the camera? And here is my collaborator, Lisa Marigo-Jelly. And we basically called back younger generations, sensei generations, and Lisa worked with them to study the animations and kind of repeat some of the gestures and had them loop some of the movements that are connected to the stories of their grandparents. These are my cousins performing in this piece, responding to, I think, the bombing of Japan newspaper. And so Lisa sees this as a kind of an opportunity for the descendants to come back, to inhabit the space again, listen to the stories again, and then unravel that narrative that's caught inside, that sometimes is silenced and not spoken, and to unravel it through dance and movement.
So you can see the dance film on a monitor in the exhibition as well, so you can watch it all the way through. The next project we'll talk about is in the first gallery when you enter, ours. It's called Tides and Moons, Herring Capital, the most recent. So it was developed in 2022 for the Nanaimo Art Gallery. And this work really shares the history that many Japanese Canadians who might be in the room tonight would know about the connection between the West Coast and the interior, and the dislocation and displacement of families to here. So it goes through the history of herring fishing off of Nanaimo, Can you talk about the development of that work and its installation there?
Sure. So the work that we're looking at here, Tides and Moons Herring Capital, was also an animation. And in this instance, Jesse Birch at the Nanaimo Art Gallery had invited me to think about the presence of Japanese Canadians there before the war. And I had done some research and found that there were herring salteries along also the shores of Seisuchun, and a boat building facility as well, a Japanese boat building facility. And around the 1930s, because there was a tax on salt in China, Nanaimo became known as the herring capital and exported salt by the masses. And around the 1920s also, there was a mysterious kind of like rush or a shoal of herring. And if you look at the archival images, it's like miles and miles and miles and miles of herring. Jesse invited me to do a site visit to Seisuchun, and we came across where there would be a Japanese onsen and ofuro and a boat building facility. And he had mentioned that also in Seisuchun there's an albino white raccoon. And on the day of my site visit, one it looked like it was 100 years old, rushing out of the ocean ran to us. So in the animation, you'll see a shape-shifting magical raccoon. And I also reached out. There he is right there, the raccoon. And then I reached out to see who might have any remembrances of their time in Nanaimo, and very difficult to find. Not a lot of Japanese Canadians, I think. There's a few families there, but not a lot of people remember that. But one person came forward, Mr. Jim Sawada, and he shared with me a story about what he was told by his grandfather, which kind of mapped out that they played sumo, that they had an onsen, that there were these bunker beds for these workers to come. And so the 11-minute animation was created based on his stories, some of the things that I could find at the Nanaimo Museum. And some of the things that I did find in the Nanaimo Museum was, even before their internment, a lot of the salteries, they're also made out of wood, it's just a place to dry herring, would be mysteriously burnt down. And so I kind of also document, and in the historic archives, it's just listed as mysterious fire. So it's kind of interweaving also the racial animosity towards Japanese, Canadians and Japanese even before the internment, because they were seen as a threat, an economic threat for doing so well in berry farming and in being prosperous in terms of the herring salteries as well. And there were also sculptural elements, which you'll see a shoal of herrings inside these wooden automatons. And oftentimes, when I do this sort of deep memory work research that's really dense with history, I physically need to make something that's kind of, I don't want to say mindless, but a repetitive gesture. And oftentimes beside the animation is something that comes up. So what came out of Tides and Moons Herring Capital were, maybe 200 or 300 little herrings, and you'll see a few of them on display that you could turn the crank and have them run and move, or swim and move, because they don't have feet. Just their herring.
So now we're in Japan, which was a real shift for you, working on the history of Japanese Canadians. And in 2017, not 1917, you went to Akita, Japan. You were invited by the University of Art there, and Makiko Hara, the curator, invited you to do a project there. So I put together some images of the research and that trip that you did. But maybe you can just talk about that difference first.
Sure. So what we're looking at is a research trip in 2017 with curator Makiko Hara and Toshiaki Ishikura from the Akita University of Art. And they had invited me they were looking for an artist of sort of Asian diasporic descent, someone from North America who could come in and respond to some of the folklore and some of the kind of different experimental narratives and anything that has to do with time and creatures. And Akita is the region that faces not the Pacific Ocean side, but the Japan Sea side. So that whole region is kind of filled with like ghost stories and monster stories and folklore, all things that I love. I've just let all of you know. And so I was invited to think about those things, think about the quality of time, ghosts. And so I was taken, this was a strange site visit curated by Makiko and Toshiaki. So I was taken to different, like previous was a temple, but this is a Namahage museum. And one of the traditions that they have in Akita is that on New Year's Eve, the men in the community make these paper mache masks, and they have these paper mache swords and this straw outfit, which is made out of kede. And herds of them will come to your house on December 31st to scare the heck out of your bad luck. And they're scary. I think if you were a child, if this came to your doorstep, you would be deathly afraid. And it's sort of a New Year's ritual. And as the home, you would basically prepare your best smoked mackerel, your sashimi, your sushi, everything to feed the Namahage demon so that they get drunk with joy and excitement and forget and leave. But they also carry this book. And the book basically has everything bad that you've done all year. So they could be like, Charo, December 11th, you didn't feed the cat, and so I'm coming to eat your arm off, ha ha ha, and come. And then you have to be like, no, but I made the salmon for you, and then he forgets. So there's this tradition like this, which my family doesn't practice, but we did for a while practice this idea of preparing foods and these rituals to kind of close off the year, to think about the end of the year, and then feast with your family on New Year's Day. And so there was this kind of beautiful transference of thinking, oh, these are some things that my grandmother kept that are deeply rooted in Japan. But despite everything that had happened, they sort of kept these things. And that I kept the language, so I speak Japanese as well. So I'm able to kind of be here and really hear that and see them. And something else, a different part of me kind of comes to life when I'm there. So that's kind of great. This is a bizarre moment. So they said, Cindy, you love time and you love thinking about narrative. You need to go see the miso factory. And I was like, why? And they said, because, and also like, it's interesting, these are huge. I don't know if you could tell the scale. They're probably about as big as a screen and filled with soybean paste. And you make this delicious soup. And the more you ferment these beans, the more delicious broth you have. And they think about miso and fermentation as like the process of life and death and the cycle. So he thought I needed to come here to be with the energy of fermentation, which is kind of funny. And you're not allowed to eat oranges before you walk into the space. That was the other strange thing. And so as a result, then I came back and applied for a Canada Council funding to do a project in response to all that research, and created a work called Cave to Dream. And in Akita-ken also, families sit in what's called a kura, or a sort of a snow dome that the family gets together and make, and there's a little fire, and you sit and tell stories and feast with your family in the winter time. And so these are 4 portals, or 4 screens. They play 4 stories based on the 4 seasons of time: spring, summer, winter, fall. And they come with a little porcelain piece. And they're kind of seasonal stories based on this aesthetic of Japanese palm stories, size of your hand, character-driven, no real plot or anything, just sort of sitting in emotion, sitting in feelings. And the costumes of the Namahage. So for the work of Snow, I cast 4 women to play Namahage. Traditionally, it's performed by men, but I ended up casting women, and they play the demons. And this piece especially, if you stay with it, kind of talks about that tradition of like the demons coming to your house in Lynn Valley. This was Lynn Valley. And the grandma is the superhero, and she protects her granddaughter from the demon.
So this also was performed or activated when it was shown at the Richmond Art Gallery, and there's a video of that performance in the gallery too. Just show you some of these costumes. They were worn during the performance that you'll see. And we also have a Namahagi shrine, and you can write down something that you want to let go for the year, and roll up your little scroll and deposit it with the Namahagi demon puppet that's in the gallery. We also have an area where you can make an offering to the demons. You can draw something on their plate and then put it up for an offering throughout the exhibition. This is the final work, the Sasaki tree, a jewel, and the mirror. And this came together in another residency at the Burrard Arts Foundation in 2020. And they wanted you to explore new ways of working through material or something that you hadn't done before. We joked when we were organizing this exhibition that we would decide which works go in the exhibition based on the tarot, which we did not do, but divination and fortune telling is actually a part of your practice. So that really comes to light in this work.
Yeah, so this work is a suite of 50 tiny deities, and then with their shadows, it's a suite of 100 deities in the sky. And I'm thinking, for the Burrard Arts Foundation residency, they asked me to explore something that was a material-based practice and more process-based, which is something a departure from what I normally do, something very research-based. So it was kind of also just a fun opportunity to play in the studio. And so they're silkworm cocoons, small air-dry clay, wood, porcelain feet, and Japanese rice paper. And these are the little feet. And each of these deities, numbered 1 to 50, represent a constellation up in the sky. So another way to kind of map time or think about placement and directions is through this, I did some research and found this old Asian sky map. So it's like our north, south, east, west points are protected by an animal, and then each quarter of the sky is also filled with a different object. So like a horn, a cup, a claw, or like there's different objects, and they're not meant to be seen as a singular, but as a story together, interwoven. And I thought that was really interesting. And so they ended up becoming kind of a suite of divination objects. And in the back, you'll see there's, I think, 6 canvases. They're unfinished canvases of my Japanese Canadian grandmother used to do bunkashishu embroidery. And I was bestowed and left with the boxes of unfinished bunkashishu. And so I brought them back into this work. So you'll see those also as the sky backdrop. And even at Burrard Arts, they were activated. So you could get a moon reading by tapping on 3 of these little deities that resonated with you, and then I would read your sky chart. Whether it was accurate, I don't know, but people enjoyed it very much. You enjoyed it.
I enjoyed
You tried
it.
Yeah.
Cindy actually will be activating this work in a performance on June 2nd at the gallery. There's only a few spots, but if you want to go through the process of picking a card or picking your figure, and she'll do a reading for you. We're wrapping up, but I also wanted to mention that Cindy will be here to do an artist talk, probably a full hour on June 1st when she's back, at 2 o'clock in the studios. So you'll have an opportunity to go through your entire practice. But I'm sure you're all anxious to go and see the works, and you've been very quiet and listening closely, so thank you. And thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
And thank you, Victoria. The bar is open, so please enjoy your evening. Thanks for coming.